Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Pushing Cardboard. I'm your host, Grant Lindenberg, and this is episode 29, Vez Arponen and Panzer North Africa. Vez is the designer of All Bridges Burning, a game on the Finnish Civil War and the Coin series at GMT. He's got a new game on the P500, Order and Opportunity. We'll talk about both of those and how he came to game design so quickly in his games playing career. And then I'll walk you through Panzer North Africa, the latest in the storied series by James Day and Fernando Solo Ramos. And of course there will be news, newbie tips, and miscellaneous chatter about the hobby. Despite Sam London being suddenly everywhere on Wargame podcasts and interviews, our chat last month was very well received. Though I did get one message that boiled down to scrap the interviews, give us more games talk. Fair enough, I get it. I'll try to keep the game dives coming. But I can't promise no more interviews, as they're pretty popular as well. Let me know if you're finding the newsletter useful. My thought was that I'm often talking about things that I have links for, but you're in your car or you're walking or you're on the bus or whatever, and you've got no access to check them out. And by the time you're back to your computer or your phone, you've forgotten about it. This way I can send you all the links directly and everyone will be able to have them and they don't have to come by the show page or hunt them down. So that's that. Let me know what you think of it. News. Well, I'm happy to say that this episode is sponsored by Noble Knight Games. They're a terrific game store, and even though they're in the US and I'm in Canada, I've ordered from them many times and always been happy with my purchases. So when they wrote to say that they'd caught my show and wanted to know if I was interested in a sponsorship, it took me about 2 seconds to say yes. Of course, this being a podcast, it's a little tricky for you to let them know I sent you. The best way to do it is to go to pushingcardboard.com and just click on one of the Noble Knight links to take you to their storefront. If you're listening to this via video, I'll put a link in the description if YouTube will let me. Or just go by my website like the podcast listeners do. The links there will take you directly to their store and it'll let you know that I'm the one who sent you. My other big news is that this Sunday night, March 24th, I'll be hosting my first live stream. Well, first that isn't a part of someone else's online convention. This is a totally a Pushing Cardboard event. I'm hosting Sean Drulinger, who you'll remember from our conversation in episode 12. Sean is the designer of Point Blank V is for Victory, and he'll be doing a live teach and play session of that game, and you're invited to watch and ask questions. I'd love to see you there, both to see what Sean's game is all about, but also to give me a bit of a gauge as to whether or not there's an audience for this sort of thing. Check the website or the newsletter for a link to the event, or search up my YouTube channel. It'll be there under live streams. That's Sunday, March 24th, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Okay, on to some news that's not about me. Compass is kickstarting a game set in World War I Africa. It's called Schutztruppe. It looks interesting. I'm thinking I might back this one. Kind of looks cool. Shiloh, The First Day, is the next game up in the Blind Sword system. This was designed by Steve Carey, who also designed A Greater Victory, which I've covered extensively and am still playing. Steve's a great guy and a really obsessive designer, so look for real attention to detail here. I've been lucky enough to playtest it a bit. Well, actually, really, the playtesting part was a bonus, as what I was eager to see was what it looked like, and particularly what Steve had done with the opening of the battle, as it starts with a surprise attack by the Confederates. I'm really looking forward to this one. Speaking of playtesting, I've also been dabbling in a bit of that with Volko Ruhnke's new game, Coast Watchers. Many of you will have seen the video of the interview and demo session I did with Volko on the game previous to being formally announced. Volko's a clever guy. He'd heard my interview with Will Bauer a few episodes ago where we were complaining a bit about the Levian campaign rulebooks, given how much we like the games. And instead of being put off by this, Volko reached out to us and asked if we'd like to take it the rule book for his new game, Coast Watchers, as he was trying something new and he appreciated the feedback. That led Will to doing a giant lift on taking the playtest Vassal module to a place where it was ready to be distributed to playtesters, and I did some playtesting on the module for Will, so I suppose I'm sort of Coast Watchers playtester at this point. Anyway, that's all a bit of a history and what's been going on with that game. It's now being playtested. Volko is looking for more playtesters, so volunteer if you're up for it. It's a totally cool game, and if you don't know where to reach him, hit me up, I'll get you in touch. And in a final piece of Coast Watchers news, it's finally on the P500 at GMT, so I'll post a link if you want to back it. Speaking of GMT, they've put out 2 newsletters since my previous episode, so there's a bit extra to pass along. A few games shipped in February of interest to me were Panzer North Africa, which I'll talk about later, and Rebel Fury, the first game, big box game of Mark Herman's. It takes his Gettysburg and Waterloo system and he applies it to, I think, 6 battles on the American Civil War. So that'll be cool. And then the other thing that shipped that was of interest to me was the second edition of France 40 from Mark Simonich. In new P500s, I think a lot of people will be interested in Lenin's legacy, if not for the topic, certainly for the designer, Matthias Kramer. He grabbed my attention with his Watergate game a few years ago. He's been a terrific hobby game designer for years, but in recent years, he's turned to history and politics, so definitely our gain. And then there's North Africa 40, not 41. This is North Africa 40, a prequel expansion to the Mark Simonich North Africa 41. I gotta say, I mean, is it just me or does it feel like North Africa 41 just came out? I haven't even done more than push a few counters around on it yet, and we've already got an expansion for it. Anyway, that's the way she goes. GMT always teases us with a few up-and-coming things. So, like my buddy Grant from the Player's Aid, I'm going to take a few guesses as to what's up. I'll put the February and the March list together here, and we'll see what we have. First up, they have a shadowy hide-and-seek World War II game set in the South Pacific. Well, that's clearly Coast Watchers. No points for me there. That was an easy one. A battle game set in medieval Italy. I initially thought another game in the Men of Iron series, but then it says it's a battle game, so it can't be Men of Iron. So I really have no idea. But for some reason, I have a hunch the designer might be Justin Facino. We'll find out. Something new in the GBACW series. Now, could this be the 4 battles in one box that Alan Dickerson is working on? I don't know if that's been announced yet or not, so that's going to be my guess there. Another ACW multi-pack for your American Civil War wargamers. Well, as Rebel Fury from Mark Herman is already out, I'm guessing this is Volume 2, which I've read Mark Herman is already working on. And then finally, from the February one, a deluxe GMT edition of a hobby classic strategic game. I mean, I have no idea. I mean, they're not going to do. I'm not going to embarrass myself by guessing. I have no idea. Okay, here's the March ones. A new game from Mark Herman. Does this guy rest? Does he ever sleep? I've gotten, again, no idea on this one, so I'm going to guess it's an Ancients game. Next, the 4th game in our already popular Vijayangara, oh boy, coin-adjacent ICS series. Again, I've got no clue here. I still can't pronounce the first one, so I'm not ready for the next one yet. A new game in the Hellenis system. Now, this is exciting. I wonder if it's also going to be Craig Besink designing, or it's just using the same system as Hellenis. I've heard no whispers about this one, so I'm just going to guess that it might be about the Roman Civil War, Caesar versus Pompey. Who knows? We'll see. That could be a really cool game, though. I look forward to that one. And then finally, 2 American Revolution themed games. My only guess here was maybe it's another BOAR, BOAR series game release with 2 games in a single box. Like maybe a bi-pack instead of a tri-pack. I don't know. Anyway, that's my guesses. We'll see down the line how I did. GMT also announced Weekend at the Warehouse coming up April 18th to 21st. I'm going to make the long drive once again, so say hello if you make it there as well. And, well, that's enough GFT. San Diego HISCON has added another online event. They're going to be holding another online convention on June 8th. There's no other details yet, but expected to have more things than you can possibly take in and a great cheap ticket price for the entire affair. And the way they often do them, they do them in just one day, but they start like in morning in Europe, not morning East Coast. So they go from like morning in Europe to nighttime in California. So there'll be a lot of events, and I'm not kidding. There's going to be events. There's going to be 2 or 3 events, and you want to see all 3 of them, and they're all on at the same time. They got so much going on that everything overlaps itself, and you can't see everything. But it's well worth checking out. And the last time the ticket price was $10 for the whole thing, so it was cheap at 4 times the price, really. A Most Fearful Sacrifice is getting yet another Kickstarter, as it's getting a 3rd printing. This is a reprint of the 2nd edition, which had a few upgrades from the original game. Man, Herman Luttman really hit it out of the park with this one. And VUCA Simulations have announced that they have a new web shop for customers in Canada and the US. I think this must also means that they're having their games distributed in North America instead of shipping directly from Europe. I'm not sure about that, but that's just my guess. In any case, use the URL vucasimulations.com if you're in the US or Canada, and vucasims.com if you're anywhere else in the world. Okay. What's on the table? I had a suggestion from a couple of pushers on the Discord server, Don and Quarksta. They suggested I talk more about strategy or AARs in the podcast. And I thought maybe that might fit here. So instead of talking about all the different things I'm playing all the time, I'm just going to talk about one or two and maybe give an AAR or talk about what I'm trying to do with it. Anyway, this month, let's talk about Death in the Trenches. I'm playing this via Vassal PBM with Terry Simo. He's a designer in his own right as well as a developer, but neither of us had played this before, so we both dove in cold. It's an interesting game in that there's hundreds of events that do or don't happen, depending on rolls of dice, and it has a super interesting combat system where you can push your luck on how many dice you roll in combat, but if you overroll, your attack fails and causes no casualties at all. In our game, it's spring 1915, and I'm the Entente. Early on, the Germans had taken Brussels and were making progress towards Paris, but due to some bad luck and a couple of reversals, the French have just pushed them back out of Belgium. Elsewhere, things aren't quite as rosy for me. I've made almost no progress in Africa, and now the Boers are rebelling, and my Brits failed to contain them. Things are more of a standoff in the east. I just managed to take the fortress of Tannenberg. Forts are tough to take in this game, but this one was undefended other than its garrison. It's still tough to take because they still get like 20 strength points just as a garrison. But as I did the attack late in the turn when the German was running out of reserve divisions, when I managed to take it, he didn't have enough reserve divisions left to pay for the loss, so he lost the fort. In the south, I made an error and let Turkey into the war early, which means I had to pull some Russian troops south. So far, we've had events that have kept the whole front down there mostly static, but that's not going to last forever. I got to say, I'm really enjoying this one so far. Lots of fiddly rules for every minor state that pops up, of course, but it's manageable, and the varying events make it completely replayable. New games to the collection. Wings, World War I plane-to-plane combat, 1916 to 1918. This is an older one. I got this and the next one at a sort of a once-in-a-lifetime sale at my friendly local game store. Gord, who owns and runs that store, has been a firm believer in never putting anything on sale, but I guess some of his staff talked him into getting rid of a little extra stock. So I got this Wings game. It's the old Excalibur version. Looks very detailed. Might be a while before I get someone to play with me, but what the heck. And then I also got Aces High, which is sort of the opposite. Another World War I air game. Very slim box, minimal components, but as I'm interested in World War I games, what the heck. I got Commands and Colors Tricorn Jacobite Rising. I really love the Tricorn system, so this is a no-brainer. I'm not actually sure why I hadn't bought it already. France 40, the second edition. This was on the P500, so it came in that way. Hood Strikes North, the Tennessee Campaign, fall 1864. That was another pre-order that came in. And then Rommel's War from Worthington. That was another pre-order. Man, don't you hate it when all the pre-orders come at the same time? How do you explain that to your spouse, right? And then finally, Blood in the Fog and Seven Pines or Fair Oaks. Hollenspiel had a flash sale of some of their out-of-print games, so I grabbed these two. They both look interesting, and I'm glad to be able to get a couple of out-of-print games that I might not otherwise have got my hands on. Newbie tips. Last month, my tip was about learning new games, and I got a great email in response about that from listener Ron Campo. Along with some appreciation for the podcast that would make me blush to read, Ron wrote, "Back in the day, I would read a rule book entirely and then start trying to play. But over the ensuing 50 years, my attention span and probably patience has ebbed. I know you do as I do, skim the components and player aids and follow the sequence of play as best you can. However, what really helps me is video playthroughs posted by fellow gamers who I'm entirely grateful for. Sure, they make mistakes and sometimes I catch them. Other times players make comments in the comment field. But since most people are visual learners, this really helps move the learning process along. One final thing for the newbies, I would recommend they familiarize themselves with the various terms or glossary of terms in each game. Sure, ZOCs, attack, and defense strengths are a given, but games often introduce new terms that players, old or new, might not be familiar with. For example, when I learned to play Field of Fire, I had no idea what a VOF was. Now I know it's a volume of fire because it's in the glossary. Well, thanks, Ron. That's a great tip. And it makes for a good place for me to remind you that we have a fledgling glossary here at the Pushing Cardboard website. So stop by if you need to look something up and add a term or ask for one to be defined if you've got something you can't figure out. Okay, today's featured game is Panzer North Africa by James Day and Fernando Solo Ramos, published by GMT. GMT was kind enough to send me a copy to review, so thanks GMT. James Day has a long history with this subject as he was the designer of the original Panzer 88 and Armour games from Yaquinto back in 1980, as well as a whole series of miniature rules for AFV combat in World War II as well. The man is obviously a super treadhead. In this particular game, love series. The old Yaquinto games were loved, and the new Panzer series is even more so. There's the original game, 4 expansions, and now this North Africa game, which is like an expansion in that it's the exact same system, but it's sold as a new game in that it's a complete game. Everything you need is in the Panzer North Africa box. You don't have to. You can dive right in at that point. But secondly, I want to mention how well it loved as is, because I have to say I bounced off this game a little bit. That's surprising to me because I'm a bit of a treadhead as well. Avalon Hill's Tobruk was my first real war game, and I've always loved the classic tanks of the desert. Grants and Matildas versus Panzer 3Gs and Js, Martyrs and Semivantes. So why did I bounce off this game, given it has so much of what I like? Well, I wouldn't say it's any one thing, but more like death by 1,000 cuts. And even death is going a bit far, because I like the game enough that I'm sure I'm going to play it again. But anyway, I'll try to mention them, the little things that bugged me as I describe the game, and then list any I've forgotten at the end. First up, this is a big, heavy box of a game. You might guess that's because of mounted maps, but the game includes paper maps. The weight is more due to the counters and the unit data cards. They're printed on cardboard. The unit data cards are the same thickness as the counters. And the counters are large. Tanks, guns, and other units are 7/8 inches, and the markers are 5/8 inches. So instead of 5/8 and a half, we're getting 7/8 and 5/8. So between all the counters and the unit cards, which are roughly by 5 inches by 4 inches, there's a lot of cardboard in there. And then on top of those 12 geomorphic maps, there's also about 50 overlays to let the scenario designers make whatever they like. The counters are a top-down view, full color. They're nice and big, but there's something about them I don't like. Partly it's the main font, which is nice and clear, which I love. But there's just something, and I get it, this is totally subjective, but there's just something ugly about the main font that runs under the bottom of the counter. I don't know, something about the whole layout of the counter I don't like. I don't know. Maybe I'm just so used to ASL AFEs where the vehicle points at the corner of a counter that I find these less attractive as the vehicle faces aside. And then, well, the full color vehicle drawings are nice in theory. With their full camouflage, it's difficult to tell which end is the front of most AFVs where the gun barrel doesn't extend past the front of the hull. Until you have a close look, it's just a mass of tans and browns. Good camouflage, I guess. And then one other complaint about the counters. They're double-sided, but with a different unit on each side. There's not step losses or anything like that. So that certainly lets them get more units printed on a less amount of counters. But it's also a bit of a nightmare for sorting and storing and finding what you need, because unfortunately not every unit counter is the same. It's kind of hard to explain, but what I mean is they're not... Well, here, let's say we're looking at a Panzer 4H counter. Maybe the flip side are some PSW 222s, but then on the flip side of another Panzer 3H, there might be trucks or something. And the flip side of the other PSW 222s might be flak 88s. So it's very difficult to store, very difficult to sort. And in one scenario I played, I couldn't find all the British A13s I needed, as they were back printed with another vehicle that I also needed. So I had to choose which one I was going to use, and then just use spare counters for the other ones. It's doable because you got the vehicle data cards, but it's not ideal. And if you go to all the work of making these painted counters, beautiful counters, it's a shame to not be able to have enough to do what you want to do. The maps are good looking and functional. I'm not a fan of overlays, and the scenarios here use a lot of them, 5 to 10 on just about every scenario. A little removable putty keeps them in place, and it's even better if you have a sheet of plexi to put over the whole map once the overlays are put down. Speaking of scenarios, there's a ton here, 32 in fact, enough to fill 2 whole scenario books. And I'll also say I really love the way the scenarios are laid out here. Each one takes 3 to 4 pages. There's the description of the situation, the map, the overlay setup, and then the special rules, setup rules, and victory conditions. And then the OOBs are large with pictures of all the units. I just love it. Nothing bums me out more than setup instructions with just a text file of the units. I should also mention the rule books, including the 2 scenario books. There's 5 books in all, maybe actually more. There's 2 scenario books, a book of basic and advanced rules, a book of optional rules, and a playbook. And then I also forgot there's a TO&E book, which I guess is provided to provide players who want to make their own scenarios a complete listing of all the orders of battle and units equipment used in the desert and included in the game. Anyway, back to the rule books. I have to say the main rule book is a bit of pain in the ass as a reference. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's a rule book that contains both the basic and the advanced game. The first section is the basic game, and these rules kind of to me, they're of little value except as an introduction to the system. I can't imagine anyone who gets into this game being a dedicated player of the basic rules. There's just not enough meat on the bone, and if you're a treadhead, you want a little bit more detail. So then come the advanced rules, and this is where it gets pretty sticky. The advanced rules are laid out in the same general order as the basic rules, which is cool, but they don't reiterate the basic concepts. They just add to them. So if you're looking to find out about a certain concept, you're likely going to have to flip back and forth between the basic and the advanced rules to find everything you're interested in. That's a real pain in the ass as far as I'm concerned. On the plus side, there is an index, but again, I gotta say, it's not the best. For example, try looking up APCR, or armor-piercing composite rigid. You'll find nothing in the index, even though that ammo type is available to many units in the game. As well, there's a new terrain type here that doesn't come in the original Panzer. It's called desert buildings. There's no listing for that either in the index. There's no mention of it on the player aids. All I could find was that they're designated by special rules only, and they change the cover value on rooftops. But I mean, is that all? I'm not sure. I just couldn't find much about them. You'd think there'd be a rule section or at least a reference in the index telling you where to find the info about them. Before I get into an overview of some of the systems in the game, I gotta say, dedicated Panzer players, let me tell you right off, there's not gonna be much new for you to learn here. It's exactly Panzer as you know and love, with just some new rules for desert terrain types, sun blindness, sand and dust. The new stuff really for dedicated players is all the new counters, the scenarios, the maps, and the overlays. But for those not familiar with the system, here's a brief look at how it works. The counters represent single vehicles, single guns, and squads. The same tactical level as many other World War II games since Squad Leader first appeared. The hexes represent a distance of 100 meters compared to Squad Leader's 40 meters, but I think that's an appropriate difference as Panzer's primarily a game about AFVs, so the longer ranges work better for tank battles. So a typical scenario here will pit a group of German or Italian units against a group of British units. Set them up as per the excellent scenario instructions, and away you go. First up in the sequence of play is spotting. It's a bit of a convoluted process, but it gets easier the more you do it. We'll just talk about vehicles for now, but the same concepts apply to leg units too. They just have their own column on the spotting range tables. Spotting range table. Already you might be starting to understand that this game has a lot of tables. A lot. Which makes it fairly fiddly feeling if you don't like that style. But if you're the sort of gamer who feels more like tables and charts, who feels that more tables and charts means there's more realism or it's a better model, well, then you're going to love it. Anyway, back to spotting. The rules are a little confusing when you first read them, but they begin to make sense once you actually use them. You're allowed to check spotting at any time, so I'm not totally sure why the spotting phase is in the sequence of play. That had me scratching my head for a bit, but it turns out you need to check spotting for any units you wish to issue a fire command to later in the sequence of play. So that makes sense, but I'm still not sure you actually need the initial spotting phase. There's probably something I'm missing. But if you're allowed to check spotting anytime, might as well do it before issuing the commands. And maybe check the spotting on units that aren't going to get a fire command just to keep your opponent guessing. Maybe, I don't know. I guess it's possible. Anyway, the default spotting range to see a vehicle is 20 hexes, and that can be decreased depending on what sort of cover terrain the target is in, but also increased if the target vehicle moves or fires, things like that. As far as I could tell, you don't have to mark every vehicle that has been spotted. It remains fairly clear. You just put special markers on the units that move or fire to indicate that they have increased spotting range. Once a unit is spotted, it remains spotted as long as an enemy unit is still in range to spot it. Well, that makes sense, as you could just do another spotting check anyway. Though I was never entirely clear what happens when a unit is spotted using the range bonus for having moved, but then it doesn't move or fire the next turn and is beyond the standard 20 hex range. Does it become unspotted? I don't think so. In my place, it was kind of a moot question anyway, as units got well within the 20 hex range often as soon as possible in order to engage the enemy. Next up is the command phase. Now, this is the part of the game that I really, really liked. It's where the dry technical stuff is shed and some uncertainty is introduced. It's got two main parts. First, each side is rated for the overall quality of their entire force. And then you count up all the non-recon units involved in your side, and you check the line on a chart for the intersection of your force quality and your number of units, and you'll be given a certain number of commands. The better the quality of your units, the more commands you'll get. The more units you have, the more commands you'll get. But you'll never have as many commands as you have units. So then comes the fun part. Without knowing which player will go first, both players have to distribute these commands to their units. The commands are hidden from your opponent, so neither of you can see what the other player's commands are. And like I said, you're going to have far fewer commands than units. Depending on your force quality, though, you'll also have a command radius of between 0 and 2 hexes. And that means that when you're doling out the commands to units, you can give a single command to a unit and it will be shared with any other units within the command radius of that unit. Lesser quality forces are at a real disadvantage, as they have to keep individual units packed together just to ensure they're all able to receive commands. And then the fact that neither of you knows who's going to go first adds to the tension. To my mind, that sort of works like a fudge versus some sort of simultaneous movement system or written orders system. The commands themselves can be fire or move, very straightforward. And then there's also Overwatch, which lets the commanded unit fire at any enemy it sees that fires or moves, but with some negative DRMs compared to just a pure fire command. And then finally there's Short Halt, which is a shoot and scoot sort of command. You get to fire, but with a reduced hit chance, and then you get to move, but only up to half your movement allowance. I gotta say, this is a great system, and it's the thing I like most about the game. Maybe I'm showing my colors in that some players might find this the gamiest part of the rules, but I really loved it. So next up is the initiative phase. This is where we figure out who goes first. It's a simple roll-off, but again, force quality provides dice roll modifiers, so a better quality side is going to get the initiative more often. Critically, whoever wins the initiative roll decides who's going to be the first player for that turn. The first player fires first, but moves second. So from here it goes, first player fires with a fire marker, then the second player fires all theirs that have a fire marker. Then the second player right away moves all their moving units, and finally the first player moves all their units. Of course, any units under an Overwatch command may fire whenever a spotted unit in their LOS moves or fires. So you can see how knowing about the initiative roll-off totally affects what you choose back in the command phase. Movement is really straightforward, nothing new here. Each vehicle has 3 numbers on a letter as its movement allowance. The letter just tells us if it's tracked or wheeled or whatever, and because they have separate columns on the terrain effects chart. But the 3 numbers are for off-road movement, path movement, and road movement. A lot of off-road movement in the desert for tanks. This number is often down in the 2 to 4 range. Scout cars and recon vehicles get a more generous 6 to 9 maybe. You'll see that movement really slows down when you're not on a road or path. Other than that, movement's really simple. There's a movement point cost depending on the terrain. Facing is important, of course, and there's no cost for a single hex side change of facing in each hex you enter. It's a good thing movement is so straightforward because combat is not. It's lots of tables and die rolls. So let's look at a typical armor-piercing AFV to AFV shot. Like most tactical games, we start with a 2-hit roll. You determine the range in hexes, and then you look at the firing unit's data card, and it will list some gunnery ranges: point blank, short, medium, long, and extended range. And there's going to be a number under each of these. You cross-indexed for the type of ammo you're using. Your shot's going to fit into one of these ranges. So once you know what the range you're firing at, you go to the 2-hit table on the player aid card. It has some columns with the range types, short, medium, long, etc. And you'll be rolling a percentile dice here for the shot. And each range has a default to-hit number. For example, the default to-hit at medium range is 50. So you hit on a 0 to 50. Well, at long range, it's 0 to 30, see? So then there's a bunch of possible modifier. And they're not modifiers to the dice roll, but they move you up and down the table from that base level. Target size can shift you 1 or 2 columns up or down, depending if you're extra large or extra small. The cover the target is in can move you down. Target motion, or whether the fire is in Overwatch, dust, smoke, the whole range of things that will move up, that will move the 2-hit number up or down the range column. But you'll finally have a target number to roll for, so you roll and you hit or you don't. If you do hit, you may have managed to hit. You may manage to get off more than 1 hit. Each gun is rated for its rate of fire as well. They're either normal, quick, rapid, or fast. Using the same 2-hit roll result you just rolled, you look up the AP number of hit. You look up. You look on the AP number of hits table. Here you cross-index the final 2-hit number that you needed with the rate of fire of the weapon you were firing with, and the result will tell you what you needed to have rolled to get extra hits. And an interesting feature here is that any extra hits can be assessed against nearby units if the original target is knocked out. So there's rules for how far away they can be, but usually it's within 1 hex of the original target. So if you get 2 hits and you knock out your target with the first hit, you can put the second hit on another tank nearby. Anyway, back to that original hit. Now we have to determine, we've got a hit, so now we have to determine hit angle. Depending on where the line of fire entered the target vehicle's hex, it's going to be front side left or right, rear, or rear side left or right. So six different angles. It'll also be on either the turret or the hull, with a small chance of hitting the tracks, or if you're firing from a higher elevation, there's also a small chance of hitting the hull deck. So it's time to roll 2 10-siders again. This time it's not a percentile roll. We'll use the 2 numbers sequentially. The first is used on the AP hit location chart to determine where exactly the target has been hit. More cross-indexing with the angle where the shot came in, and with the first die roll, and you'll get a result. You get something like a turret front or hull side, something like that. There's obviously a lot of possibilities. Then once you've got the hit location, you look at the target vehicle's data card in its defensive information, and you look where the shot hit, and the card will tell you what the armor rating is at that spot. You go back to the firing unit's data card, look up the range across from the type of ammo you used, the weapon you used, and there's going to be another number showing how much armor a hit can penetrate at that range. If the penetration number is equal to or greater than the armor value, the shot penetrates. There's optional rules to make that a little more wiggly and not so cut and dried. But anyway, if it penetrates, you look on the firing units card in the AP damage section and use the second number you just rolled, and it's going to tell you if there's no damage, which would be either to the hull or the turret, depending on where you hit, or if you're luckier, you knocked it out or brewed it up. So, like I said, there's some optional rules for the whole penetration versus armor rating routine to make it a little more variable, so it's not so cut and dried. A shot that shouldn't penetrate will have a chance to do so, and vice versa. I gotta say, as far as the damage roll, I'm a bit surprised it's done on the firer's card rather than the target's card. I would have thought that some tanks brew up more easily than others, and that should be accounted for. And it is. There's some tanks like your Shermans have a little brew up rating, so they do brew up more easily. But that's about the only thing. So I guess it's all down to whether a hit penetrates or not in terms of the defensive ratings of the tanks. As I said, if you rolled multiple hits, you can apply the next one to the same target or shift to another one within range. You go through that whole second part of the process again, determining penetration versus armor, possible damage, the whole set. Anyway, that's it. That's combat. It's a ton of tables. It's 2 rolls of 10-siders. The first is a percentile roll that doubles as 2 hit and rate of fire, and then the second is split in 2 to first determine the hit location, and then the second to determine the damage. It does become more second nature after a while, but you're still looking at a bunch of different tables on each of the player's data cards and the fire and target data. What am I trying to say? You're looking at a bunch of different tables on each of the player aid cards, and then also the fire data card and the target data card is definitely fiddly that way. But like I said, it starts to become a little bit second nature. That said, when each side has multiple different units in a battle, it's fairly interesting to try to match the strengths against the weaknesses. And personally, while I know a decent amount about AFVs, enough to know which ones have better armor, which have the better guns, etc., which are slower, things like that, it's still kind of an imprecise knowledge. So it was fun to do those original lookups after getting hit to see what the penetration versus armor details were. Seeing how much thicker the armor is on an A10 or an A13 British cruiser tank compared to their A9, for example, or how a German 75 gun penetrates at 7 to 8 hex range, but a German 50 L42 penetrates 9 at the same range. So that's kind of cool. I'm sure it's little details like these that keep the treadheads coming back for more. I've only really looked at the tank versus tank rules. There's infantry rules and anti-tank guns in the game as well. You can fire high explosive shells at them rather than armor piercing, of course. And there's all the special types of ammo, APCR, heat, high explosive anti-tank, smoke, stuff like that. And then there's, as I said, a whole other book of optional rules, morale rules, more detailed command and control rules, hidden units. It's not a thick book, but there are 55 different distinct optional rules or rule sections. Some needing quite a bit of explanation, some just a line or two. So the cool thing here is the designers encourage you to pick and choose from these to tailor Panzer to your own tastes. So I imagine that happens all the time, and people have their own optional rules that they insist on using. Okay, so where does that leave me? I played with the basic rules quickly and then with the advanced rules more carefully, both solo and opposed. I didn't get so far as the optional rules, and I didn't use any infantry, so I don't feel bad about that. At its heart, this is a tank versus tank game, and that's what I looked at. I said earlier that I kind of bounced off this game, and that kind of is carrying a lot of weight in that there are parts of the game that I really enjoyed. But there were a lot of things that got on my nerves that took me away from the experience. It is fiddly. I can take a fair bit of fiddliness if I'm having a good time. I'm an ASL player after all. But having to look in both the advanced and basic rules to find something really started to get under my skin as I played. I imagine that once you really know the game, these sorts of things fall away as you're not referring to the rule books as often. And as much as I didn't like the counter design, it is functional. I had no trouble using them other than having to remind myself which end was the front from time to time. I'm pretty sure I'll play it again. Opposed some more. Opposed, it's a lot easier to get past these quibbles because you have all the fun of the command and initiative systems. You don't have that in solo. I should also say one other thing that comes in the Panzer North Africa box is a whole solo rule system, which if you're a solo player, I didn't use them. I like to play solo just the old school way, but there's a set of solo rules there. So go ahead and do that. Anyway, back to what I was saying. The command and initiative system, that's where the game really shines for me. I'm not sure if there's a vassal module yet. Probably is. I haven't tried it, as all my play was either a face-to-face or solo with the copy that GMT sent me. Anyway, thanks GMT for that, and yeah, I'm going to keep playing it. Okay, time to hear from Vez Arponen. Vez is new to design. He's sort of new to even historical game playing. Came to it a bit later in life, but like so many designers, as soon as he started playing them, he got ideas for how to make his own. So anyway, interesting guy to talk to. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Here it is. Hello, everybody. This is Grant from Pushing Cardboard, and I'm very happy today to be talking to Vez Arponen, designer of All Bridges Burning and another game that's coming up with GMT. How are you, Vez?
I'm doing great. How are you doing? Thanks a lot for a chance to appear in your show.
It's I think you're somewhere in Europe. This is my longest long distance interview so far.
Yeah, I'm actually in northern Germany, so this is where I live and work with my family. But I come from Finland originally. I think we're gonna talk about the Finnish Civil War coin. So that's part of the reason why that topic. But yeah, so I come from Finland, but I've been here in Germany for work and family reasons for, I don't know, since 2009 already. So it's been a long time. Long
time. But but you grew up and went to school in Finland. Did you?
Until about 2001, I lived a very regular life as a Finnish boy, I suppose, and then with the studies and so on, I left at some point, and sort of things just kind of happened after that, like they often do, and here I am.
If you grew up as a Finnish young Finn, then I'm guessing you're probably a hockey fan then as well.
Yeah. So I was just as we were setting up this date, and you said you're from Calgary, right? So obviously Calgary Flames is a famous NHL team, and so every Finn I think loves ice hockey, and I do as well. I haven't had sadly so much the opportunity to watch since I moved to Germany. Germany has since the sort of the my days of youth they have developed a real hockey league and everything, but I sort of
a few players in the NHL even.
They aren't too bad. They aren't too bad either.
There's been a couple of
Finns. I don't know. Is there anybody in Calgary at this moment? I don't actually know.
We don't have a Finn right now, but I'm pretty sure Mika Kiprasov was
the goalkeeper. Yeah,
he was just back in town the other day because they raised his number to the rafters.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Yeah. He was a big player for Finland, also for the national team and everything.
He was amazing. He's quite the personality as well.
Yeah.
So growing up in Finland, when did you start playing war games? What's the war game community like in Finland?
So actually my entry into sort of the war gaming or like historical gaming is actually relatively recent. So I think there's a generation of us sort of, I mean, I struggle to say younger guys, but I'm 40 something, so I suppose I kind of count as youngish still. So there's a generation of us who've really discovered the historical games, I think, with the coin series, maybe with things like Twilight Struggle and that sort of thing, and that's how it's with me. So I really only gotten into this part of hobby with really with the coin series. So something like Cuba Libre and Fire in the Lake were really effectively my entry into the into the hobby. And so that's sort of really, I mean, if I think back to what was I playing when I was a teenager and so on, I think it was mostly computers and that sort of thing. I think there's an element in those games as well. I've always enjoyed like civilization games, so kind of historical stuff, or then something like a Sim Cities or city building. Also got a realistic theme. So I think there's that, but I don't really have a huge actually a wargaming background as such.
Well, I think I don't think you're alone. I think there's a lot of people that where Coin or Twilight Struggle pulled them into the from the history angle, brought them sort of into the sort of war game adjacent. They might discover war games from those games, or they might just keep playing more history games, which is, I don't know. I find the line between war games and history games is very fuzzy, and that's the way I like it.
Yeah, same here. I mean, so I don't have too many. I mean, so if we say like traditional war game would be like a Hex Encounter, right? So I don't have too much. Sorry.
Or a CDG these days is.
CDG, yeah. So that's the kind of CDG part of the wargaming hobby is kind of more familiar to me than the Hex Encounter side of things. Yeah, definitely.
CDGs. I mean, the first one was made in the late '90s, right? So they're 30 years old now too. It's not a new development anymore.
No, it's time flies.
So so you came to historical gaming, as an adult, not as a kid, and you started. Twilight Struggle or Coin was your first introduction. What was it about these card games that grabbed you, that kind of pulled you in?
I don't know. I remember, like playing Cuba Libre, and it was just so different from any of the Euro, games that I had perhaps played a little bit before that with my, wife and family and so on. And I think it was just the history of it. I mean, when this type of question is asked, from historical gamers, I think it's always the history, the idea that I'm here actually going through sort of, actual events. I'm faced with kind of incentives. I'm faced with decision points that are somehow historical, right? They were present there for the historical actors, and I think there's something very fascinating about this idea that we are sort of replaying history in a way here. I think and then you take a game like Cuba Libre again, which was really my gateway into this hobby. It's such a exotic theme as well, right? Cuba, revolution, Castro, the whole thing. It's just it's so very fascinating. It's so captivating. That's what I remember when I think back to the first time that I encountered a game like Cuba Libre, or Fire in the Lake, indeed, later on.
Well, we'll talk about your game All Bridges Burning later, but I think for many North Americans, they had the exact same feeling discovering that game, because the history of the Finnish Civil War is pretty overshadowed by the Russian Revolution. So
Sure. Yeah.
it's learning. I mean, that's a big appeal of the games to me, for sure, is learning new history that I knew nothing about. So, the Libyan Campaign series has also been great for that. Like,
Yeah.
I knew nothing about Taifa politics before I got Almoravid or things like that.
Yeah, sure. Isn't it Volko who talks about sort of like historical tourism?
Yes.
That you sort of go back in history at different times and you experience, some of the things that have happened. I think that is just so very, very, very fascinating. It's unbelievable, really.
Yeah, it gives you I mean, for history that you're totally unaware of, you learn about history, but even history, when it's history of something that you know fairly well, the designer often has a real distinctive point of view, and they might they might make you think of, give you something new to think about on a piece of history you thought you understood fully.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we are spoiled with choice as well these days. Like I feel like even just looking back over the span that I've been involved in this hobby somehow, it seems like there's more and more coming, more and more historical stuff. The coin series, and I mean even just looking at what GMT is doing. They are expanding into different series. Volco is their main engine in that development, certainly, or one of the centers, right? And the whole CDG family is just growing constantly in different directions. Then there are people working outside of the sort of the GMT family, if you like, and just all sorts of stuff coming out all the time. So we are so spoiled with kid stuff. It's amazing.
I'm probably about 20 years older than you, and when I first started in the hobby, it felt like you couldn't buy everything. Nobody was, I mean, unless you were, a kind of a rich kid, but it felt like you could buy everything that you were interested in almost, and you could certainly keep track. You knew every game that came out because Avalon Hill published maybe 2 to 4 a year, SPI 6 to 10, and GDW maybe 1. Like there was just a few companies, and it felt like you could understand the whole hobby. But now there's just so much coming out. It's like a fire hose now. You have to kind of focus on what interests you and hope you kind of pick up on some of the other stuff that you weren't even aware of.
Yeah, but on the other hand, we have also channels like yours and many others in the hobby that are covering games, doing videos, and that helps also to when you're trying to keep up. So thanks a lot for doing the Lord's work, as Harold Buchanan likes to say.
I totally get it because I watch other channels, other video channels. I listen to. There's not many podcasts anymore. There used to be more wargaming podcasts, but only 2 or 3 of us left at the moment. Hopefully a couple more will come back. But I totally depend on those channels as well to help me find new things that I totally missed. There's like I said, there's just no way to keep on top of it all.
Yeah. Yep.
When you were so you get into the coin games with GMT. You play Cuba Libre, Fire in the Lake, what have you. What brought you to make the leap from being a player of coin games to design your own coin game?
Yeah, so it really started with the solitaire system design for me. So I was like today still, because of family and work circumstances, I'm a solitaire gamer most of the time.
It gets easier once your kids get out of the house.
Yeah, or they start playing with you. I mean, we've just recently started playing games like Root and stuff. So that's a new discovery and an exciting development. I look forward to the day when we pull out, like, Twilight Struggle or something like that. I think that day may not be too far off. But so how it started for me was really because of life circumstances, work, right? So family. So the gaming time is kind of fragmented. It's in the evenings a little bit here and there. So solo gaming was really the only way to get to know this. And of course, here something like the coin series is really a very inviting entry point because of the solitaire systems that they've put into these games from the very beginning, right? And
each game has a bot for all of the factions. So if you're alone, if it's a 4-player game, you pick one faction and play the bots for the other 3 if that's the way you want to do it. I mean, just for anybody who hasn't played a coin game yet, you can play with any number of people, up to the maximum of whatever the game supports.
Yeah, indeed. So that was the great thing about about the coin series from the beginning, that they had these bot systems. And so I was getting into the series, and I was solo gamer, and so I was using those systems. I was falling in love with the games and just taking my time. Like people say, the solitaire systems in coin games, they can be quite involved, right? So I think that's true. And so, but when you're playing on your own, you can just take it in, just don't care so much about whether you get 100% right. So that's how it was for me, and
Absolutely.
at the same time, sorry.
Oh, I just said absolutely. When you're playing by yourself, don't worry about if you're getting it right. Just get in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the same time, I felt like they were also, as like solitaire game challenges, they were really speaking to me, right? It's not that you kind of needed to make the decisions on behalf of the opponent. So I was getting into this, and I suppose I've always had this like in me, this like when you do something, like when you, I don't know, like when you look at the walls behind us, we've got the guitars there, right? And so when you listen to music, and then you're like, hey, wait a minute, I want to try if I can do some of that stuff. They can't be so difficult, right? Start, grab a guitar and start playing some chords, and maybe if you dare to sing a little bit, and that's how it was with games for me as well. Like, I was enjoying these things, and then this gear switched in me. Like, I want to do these things. I want to know how to make that stuff, and so that was the first step for me. Trying to think. I think it was the so I revisited the bots for A Distant Plane, the coin series game number, what was it, 4 or 5, something like that. And I just sort of did my own version because there have been sort of discussions on BGG that maybe there were a couple of things about those bots that were not ideal. So I sort of started tinkering with this, and I don't even actually remember how I got in touch with Volko, but the next thing I knew, these bots were published in the C3I magazine. So they came out as a like a professional looking product, right? So the C3I magazine works with in close cooperation with GMT and GMT artists. So Charlie Kipler, who's been doing these things for many years, he was then working with me to make the official looking bot. So that's how it started. The C3I magazine played a big role there.
The same thing happened with the Fire in the Lake boxes. There was bots in the original box, and then they came out with a whole new set of bots a couple years later, right? It's like,
indeed. So for the Distant Plane ones, I sort of I developed a little bit the language in terms of which they were articulated, like the priorities and stuff. And then I guess Volko liked the ideas that I had there. So these were then introduced into the Fire in the Lake bots in later reprints, and I think Pendragon was done at that time. I wasn't so closely involved. It was more Volko doing the design, and for Fire in the Lake, it was Örjan Ariander, the Swedish guy who's been doing these bots. But I was sort of involved in the my first real sort of like a solo design project was then doing the after the Distant Plane one was doing the bots for Colonial Twilight. So there was the Brian Train 2-player coin game, and I did those. And so sort of one thing led to another. I did another game there, solo design also. The solitaire opponent in Hitler's Reich from also from GMT Games.
Also
right?
GMT,
So I did that, and so that's how I got into the hobby, really, as a kind of like as a designer. Like I really
so you
wanted
started out as a bot designer. That was how you got your. I don't mean to say you were trying to get your foot in the door, but that's how you came through the door. Was
No, I definitely wasn't trying to get through the door. I mean, I as far as I'm concerned, I mean, Volko is such a he's so welcoming. Like he's always about cooperation, always about collaboration, always about getting new designers involved, and there was no door that I could see as I came into the community, and same thing with GMT and everyone in that extended family. Everyone's just so welcoming, and so there was no real sort of barrier to entry, right? You just sort of come in.
Volko is so welcoming, so kind, so generous, but so welcoming that you find you've come through a door you didn't know it was a door, and all of a sudden you find you're playtesting for him, or you're doing something because he just makes you feel good to be a part of whatever's going on.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's often said like, I mean, two things. So one is that if you want to learn design, then it's a good idea to take a game that you like and do like a variant for it, do some work, tweak it somehow. And so, and if you listen to designer interviews, like almost everyone started that way, right? They was listening to your chat with Volko, and he was talking about how his first designs were really riffing on these CDG mechanics from a couple of different games. He was taking parts here and there. So even he started like, kind of in a way working on what was there, and so that's a very common path. And then the other thing is like, like it's always it's often said in the hobby as well that you can have ideas about games, you can have ideas, it would be nice to have a game on this, but then to actually bring it to the stage where it's playable, where it's polished to some extent, that's a whole different ball game, right? So you can, and if you manage to do that step, then I think you are sort of in the room, quite far ahead. That's often the challenge, to really get from the idea to an actual playable and a reasonably working prototype.
Well, and then you go from doing these bots to doing your own coin game. That's the step you're talking about. Not the next step we're talking about. Obviously, the game in question, All Bridges Burning, is about the Finnish Civil War, which is part of your cultural history. I'm assuming you had a big interest in that period. That was just sort of the first thing that came to your mind, or did you have an idea about how the game would work mechanically that twigged? Because was your game the first 3-player coin? I think it was, yeah. And it changed. I mean, all the coin games they're great in that they change. Everyone changes the system a little bit. That's what's kind of interesting about them. But yours is no exception. So I guess my question is, did you have the ideas about the mechanics, how they would work with the Finnish Civil War, or were you just like, I want to do something about this period, and you came up with the mechanics later?
Yeah, so I think it was like this. So I was into the coin series as a player, and I was doing the solitaire designs, and they had been the first 2-player coin game with Brian Train's Colonial Twilight, right? So it was possible to think outside of the 4-faction system that had been on up to that point the sort of the standard.
Brian
and so
Train,
I think that was
Brian Train is really good about kicking those kind of doors open.
Yeah, definitely, and he's a great guy as well. You've chatted to Brian as well.
Oh yeah.
So I think it took sort of that example to show that okay, we can think outside of the 4-faction system, and then I was so one thing that I've discovered about myself as a designer. I mean, I hardly feel like using the word because of just one game under my belt and the second one in the pot. But when I think about myself as like as a designer, then it always feels to me like games that I do, they have to be somehow personal, right? It has to be a personal connection. I can sort of imagine myself doing a game on some topic that is geographically and culturally very far removed from anything that I kind of know of, and so on. So and I was sort of thinking in that space, like what is it that I know, what do I know about, right? And of course Finnish history then suggested itself to me, and the Finnish Civil War is something that is kind of present in the Finnish society and culture to this very day, and it was certainly very present in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, right? So this is, Cold War is going on still. Finland has 1,000-kilometer border with Russia today, and back then with Soviet Union. So, and there's always been that question for Finland, like where are we? Are we west or are we east, right? And there's always that sort of being along that long border, and so the Finnish Civil War really was also a question about, okay, so there's sort of the working class in the Finnish Civil War, and they've got sympathies and they've got supporters in Russia who's going through their own working class revolution around that at the same time. And then there's Germany, the German Empire, who's fighting in the First World War with Russia, with Russians, and they're both kind of interested, and Finland is kind of there in between. And then Finland has this special interest of their own, which is for the first time in history to become an independent nation, right? So Finland up to that point, and we are talking year 1917, had not been an independent nation at all. Finland became independent in 1917 December, indeed, yes. So 1917 December, Finland declares independence. And this seems like an opportune moment because Russia itself is falling into internal turmoil, and they are no longer kind of able to pay so much attention to what's going on in Finland, this tiny part of a huge country. And then, at the same time, there's Germany, who are also showing interest in that area, right? And so there was this kind of something like a coin game set up there, that you've got these kind of external sponsors in a way, like in Fire and Lake, you might have the United States who are also participating, and then in a distant play, you've got the coalition who are also participating, kind of sponsoring a local area. So there's that sort of a tension there in the coin game, and then in the coin framework, and then and what is more important, I think, still is, in coin games, at the heart of those games, there's the idea of like support and opposition. So fighting a war, fighting a kinetic conflict, but at the same time, it's about kind of raising support, raising opposition. It's about hearts and minds, like it's sometimes put. And I felt like that was kind of a framework that really described very well something about the Finnish Civil War, which was that so we are going into this kind of civil war situation, but at the same time, it's about the future of the country. Is any faction here able to sort of give something to the country, a vision of future, and in that sense, win over the support of the population or the opposition from the population towards certain other factions? And so the coin system really seemed like a good fit for that system and that situation.
You've described the working class people who are sympathetic to the Bolshevik Revolution going on beside them, and then the more right-wing people who are perhaps more sympathetic to the Germans. But your game has three factions. You've got another faction in the middle, and that's something sort of interesting with that, right?
Yeah. So and this is where we then get into the question, like, okay, so the coin system was for 4 players up to that point, except the 2 faction system from Brian, and both of those didn't seem to fit the situation, because I felt like so on one hand, in the Finnish Civil War, you had the working class and you had the bourgeoisie and the nobility and so that part of the society, but there was always a third sort of element in this equation, which was the aspect that I mentioned earlier, that Finland really wanted to become an independent nation, right? They wanted to break away from Russia. They didn't want to become a vassal state of, the German Empire. So there was the idea. I mean, nationalism anyway. If you look sort of late 19th century, early 20th century, nationalism is present in other countries as well, right? And so this is also something that you have in Finland. The Finnish language is very different from any other language of the neighboring countries. Swedish, completely different language family. Russian, also a very completely different language family. So the language was always there, even if there was no country for those people. And so this situation seemed like a good chance for Finland to become independent. So, and that's the funny thing about this three faction setup, that you've got sort of the faction in the middle who really represent this idea that, okay, this is now our chance to become independent. We are fighting a war. We should not be going into a civil war and destroy this kind of great opportunity to become independent. So the third faction in the middle is actually a nonviolent faction, right? They are trying to keep the political process going, trying to sort of calm down the two warring parties, the Reds and the Whites. So that's how the three-player system really came to be, to sort of have some representation for the idea that Finland wants to take advantage of this historical situation to become independent, and that this process really can be only achieved on a sustainable basis through political reforms, and that's sort of like a peaceful, non-violent process. So that's really how the three factions sort of came about.
And the game also, it in terms of its time, there's a front section, as I understand it, that where it's all sort of a build up toward before the kinetic part of the revolution. So I would think that that middle faction would have a lot to do in that opening section, trying to prepare the groundwork for what they want to have happen by the end of or maybe there's a possibility that the kinetic part doesn't even happen. I don't know how your game works.
There is there's a small sort of technical possibility that doesn't happen, but most of the time it does. But yes, the game is divided into part 1 and part 2, and so the part 1 really is, we are in the year 1917, where the actual fighting civil war part hasn't yet started. That started in January 1918. So we've got sort of this 6 to 9 month period in 1917 where societal polarization is increasing. There are strikes, there's violence on the streets, there are killings, there's this and that happening. But at the same time, societal life is kind of somehow continuing. People are still going to work. People are still going about their everyday lives, but these kind of moments of violence here and there. And at the end of that period, you've got the declaration of Finnish independence. So it's kind of a mad situation if you think about it. Like the country is polarized and sort of like everyone's kind of getting weapons. I mean, that was one of the issues. Like there were no weapons. Like there were hunting rifles and that kind of stuff. The only weapons in the country were the Russian garrisons, because Finland, after all, was part of Russia at that moment. So Russian garrisons were there. So there was a chance of trying to get weapons from them, and then Germans were giving. Importing weapons to the site that they wanted to support. So there was this sort of build up towards the Civil War, and then in December, the Declaration of Finnish Independence comes kind of at just like 5 weeks before the start of the Civil War, and it kind of shows you what's going on here. It's a very curious situation, right? You're preparing for war, and at the same time, there's this idea that, well, we really want to be one people. We want to sort of be independent at the end of this. And really, for me, the kind of the third nonviolent faction is really the one that is kind of representing this idea that, okay, it's unfortunate that we've now kind of come into this civil war situation, but we need to do everything possible to kind of stop it as soon as possible, make the necessary political reforms, and then kind of start our journey as an independent nation. So that idea is kind of carried through the whole game. For instance, in terms of if I mention a small detail about the game, so there's the polarization track, which is just a track, measures the level of polarization in the country, right? And if polarization is too high, no faction is able to win the game, right? So there's this idea that we can very well collectively lose this whole thing. We can sort of screw up the independence project here. So
right.
Everyone so the dynamic is there's fighting going on between the reds and the whites, but they also have to kind of think about where's polarization here. And then there are the moderates, the non-violent faction, who are also playing that sort of polarization, trying to keep polarization under control. And so when I was thinking about games out there, then the Coin series really seemed to me to be uniquely a game system that is asking the question, what comes after the war, right? Like if you think about even something like Fire in the Lake, which was in my reading, there was always this element there, or is this element there of okay, we are trying to build a nation here. We're trying to build a state building, right? We are trying to pacify areas. We're trying to raise support of the South Vietnamese government here. We are trying to sort of move the country towards some sort of normalcy here, right? We are trying to pacify the situation. And that seemed to me like an angle that was very relevant also for All Bridges Burning, right? And the Finnish Civil War. We are in a civil war situation, but really we are already in a way looking beyond the kinetic conflict. We are looking into the possibility of having some sort of a not failed state emerge out of this crisis. So that's why I got sort of interested in the Finnish Civil War, really.
Well,
and the coin system.
That's an interesting idea. This polarization track that both the two extreme sides have to be conscious that they don't break the thing that they're all trying to build.
Yeah.
So in the actual history, the moderates win. I mean,
Yeah.
in air quotes, but
well, that's I mean,
the center track and become a functioning democracy.
Yeah, I think that's a big question that's been like what was discussed on BGG. Around the time of publication and after that, like, what is my view of like who of those three factions who actually won the Finnish Civil War, and in some ways I would I mean my answer was always that well, it was really the moderates that in some ways won, right? I mean, if we look at what happened in history, so the Reds, the working class, was comprehensively beaten militarily in the conflict. So they were, there were a lot of death. There was a lot of destruction, and they were comprehensively beaten. The Whites conquered back the main cities of the country. So in that sense, they won militarily, but that was never in some ways that was never. Well, that's the argument of the game, at least, if you like. That was never the main question about the Civil War. It wasn't about who is going to win this militarily, but it was always about this question: is there going to be a country left after this Civil War that is somehow can be an independent nation and not sort of just fall into this kind of failed state type of situation where the polarization persists? And in that sense, I think Finland did emerge as as an independent nation from this, and a nation that was functioning, that was looking for reconciliation in terms of the kind of political reforms that were introduced already partly during the Civil War and then soon after that. So I mean the thing that the kind of the social issues that are featured in the game as well, in an abstract role, but still of the time where Finland was essentially a feudal society, right? So especially in the countryside, you had feudal conditions. People were working lands that they themselves didn't own and were sort of at the mercy of the owning owner class, right? So this was part of the working class, bourgeoisie polarization there. So that was something that I think even most bourgeoisie themselves recognized. Okay, we're going to have to do something about this. This is not a sustainable situation, So there was one thing. Finland was also rapidly industrializing at that time. So there were that sort of class conflict arising, especially in the urban centers around the conditions of the working class in a rapidly industrializing situation. So those were questions that had to be solved, and they were very quickly solved, through legislation. And I think that paved way for Finland to become an independent nation in some sustainable sense. So I mean, the ultimate test of that independence came only in 1939. So we are talking, what is that, 20 years later, in the form of the Soviet attack at the invasion in the Winter War of 1939. And this is where the Finns were defending as one front, right? Finns, people who had earlier been fighting in different sides in the Civil War, where some of them were on the front together fighting away the Soviets. So I think that sort of shows that something had happened despite the Civil War. The moderate social sort of social democratic ideal, the Scandinavian model, as it's sometimes today described, big state and high taxes, but therefore, equality, education for all, that sort of thing. So that had really won the day and had been sort of institutionalized. And that's why I hold on to the idea that, well, in some sense, in a political sense, moderates really won the Finnish Civil War.
Given the way the world is right now, where we're experiencing greater polarization than I've ever had in my lifetime, and we're seeing the rise of people like Orban, and even there's a lot of enthusiasm for a weird kind of authoritarianism in the U.S. even. But I guess I'm finding. What do we learn from an experience like this, as we're facing all this increases in polarization again? It's I find it all a little bit frightening.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I do think there's a lesson here. So, I mean, I think the parallel when I think about the Finnish Civil War situation and what we have today is that we have got a fundamental restructuring of our economics, essentially, of our economic system. So today we've been going through decades of automation of production. We've been going through decades of offshoring. We've been going through this, economic globalization, whereby certain type of work has been moving, in other parts of the world, or being automatized. So that's a technological transformation that I think many are saying these days is kind of behind the kind of polarization that we are seeing today. So they are the winners and the losers, the kind of the elites and the people. That's the setup. So many are analyzing it in those terms. I mean, certainly there are these sort of culture war elements to this. It's about sort of more conservative ideas about I don't know, gender and that sort of thing, and then there's sort of the more liberal ideas. There's that element there, but there's also the economic element. And then if I look back to the Finnish Civil War, I mean, I already talked about it: the industrialization, feudal conditions on the countryside that are coming under pressure as we've got, especially industrialization. Finland is becoming part of a global, emerging sort of global market, is exporting things in the industries. People are moving from the countryside into the cities. The cities are needing to be fed. So this is a structural change situation similar to what we are going through today, or have been going through for some decades. So I see a parallel there. And yeah, obviously the hope is, I mean, the Finnish answer, like if we want to look one step further, like what was the answer that Finland was able to sort of come up with, in the course of the Civil War is, of course, I mentioned it earlier. Social sort of social democratic policies that take people along, equality enhancing measures. That's how Finland answered the challenge.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about the widening gap between the elites and everybody else, the way it's often put. But it's just another way of talking about income inequality. And I think the bigger the disparity in terms of income inequality, the more people start to get angry, and that can express itself in these culture wars and things like that. But at some point, people just get tired of feeling like they're getting shafted if they're not on the top end of the spectrum, and something's got to give.
And I think an important part of this is, so we can look at economic indicators, right? But actually, I believe the political science on this has been saying for a longer time that the so-called populists are actually not being voted by the worst of people, economically worst of people in society. It's rather, there's more of a regional thing. Like there are regional centers of decline. We can see this in the Rust Belt in the United States. We can see that we have similar areas in England. We have similar parts in France. Well, in Germany, there's the whole East-West Germany thing that is kind of a peculiarity. That's a different story slightly, but so it's a regional decline thing, and then the regions go into certain political directions, regardless of almost how particular individuals within those regions do economically. It's more like the regional decline that people seem to be, picking up. And I mean, I felt like I knew this very well, from my experience in Finland, because I come from a small industrial northern Finnish town, right? And so this is a town that was born between two paper mills, and it will die when the paper mills die, because just that's where people work, and everything is kind of premised on those two big paper mills that just give employment. And what we've seen there is the same story, like in so much of the sort of Western economies, is progressive automation of production. So those factories, they've lost thousands of jobs within a span of my lifetime, say 20, 30, 40 years, that there's thousands of jobs have been lost in those factories. And probably, I haven't looked at the figures, but if you look at the figures, what they are producing in terms of output, how much wood goes in, how much paper comes out, and what kind of profits they're making, I presume they are making more profit today than they ever were. But this is no longer translating into regional well-being, just because the jobs aren't there. The production now runs on its own, and isn't my hometown, my former hometown in Finland, one of the sort of hotbeds of this kind of populist politics? It is like that, and that's the kind of economic despair of the entire region, I think, is one of the root causes there.
Well, jumping forward to you've got a new game that you're is it on P500 now? Yeah. So a new game called Order and Opportunity, and it takes place in the post-Cold War world, which interestingly sort of is where we're seeing the rise of the polarization again. So we had that whole period in between where there was where the world felt like maybe things were back on track after the Second World War. The states were a bit crazy in their rampant anti-communism and the whole Red Scare thing, but I don't think that was a particularly American obsession. Even here in Canada, we didn't spend our time hiding under the desks or vilifying communists the same way. It was just thought of as I guess we just weren't as terrified about the spread of it. We could the same way, union employment was high. Standard of living was high, and there was a lot of years where it felt like the post-war economy was, at least here in North America, was great. I know it took England a while to get back on its feet, but that all seems to have we've seen the death of the end of the Cold War, but things don't feel better at the end of the Cold War to me.
Yeah. So. Where to start? So it's interesting you mentioned that. Yeah, once again, polarization is kind of at the center of this new game that I've been working on. So I mean, first of all, there's the basic details about the game. So it's called Order and Opportunity: Making of the Post-Cold War World Order. So right, we are now in the game starts so somewhere around the year 2000. And so we are kind of 10 years into the post-Cold War period. And this is, I mean, some people are asking occasionally the question like, why that? Why not start, at the start of why not start there? And I feel like, really, the year 2000 seems to be now, in hindsight, something of a, how do you say, like a shift occurs there. So this is the year when Vladimir Putin becomes the first time the president of Russia, and Xi Jinping in China is coming to power as well, and that sort of seems to be, in hindsight, the kind of period where the challenge to so the post-Cold War US-led order kind of rises on its feet for the first time. It takes a while. I think we've only now today, with the war in Ukraine, and how we've got a certain bloc formation happening between the sort of the democracies and authoritarians. We've only coming to realize where we were kind of in a way headed. What was the path? So this is the game. This is where the game is situated historically, right? But you were talking about this, like the end of the Cold War, and we remember the famous phrase "end of history," right? Francis Fukuyama, the famous American political scientist, coined that phrase around after the end of the Cold War. History has ended. Democracy has won. Now it's only that what remains to be done is to free trade and spread prosperity everywhere in the world, which will eventually lead to democratization of the world, right? So this was what he meant by the end of history. There was no serious ideological competition for democracy for a period of time. But of course, as we know, the story didn't quite go as that. Didn't end there, right? We've continued. The history has continued to exist and develop, and so this is where we get to polarization, right? The idea that we had a wild period of economic globalization, whereby offshoring, automation, the kind of things that we were talking about earlier, are sort of reaching new heights. There's a lot of technological development. We've got the internet, we've got computers, we've got digitization, that sort of thing, and this is where we are getting then to the kind of polarization that we have today. This idea that there are losers and there are winners in the economic story, right? And these, and even within Western sort of countries, the US led, so the West, we are seeing these divisions, and so the game is in some ways kind of a study trying to understand, how did we get there? Why didn't the history end? In what ways did it continue? What were the new sort of battle lines, as it were, in history? So this is sort of the premise of the game. Another thing, if we think about the post-Cold War period, is especially from the year 2000 onwards, we've got things like 9/11. So the whole sort of war on terror threat, the kind of I'm not sure how it was in Canada, but I mean Europe, there was a period where many terror attacks occurred in the homeland, right? And there was this kind of threat, and then there was the argument made that it's really the kind of interventions that the US-led West was undertaking in the Middle East and elsewhere that was feeding this kind of hatred of the Western societies. So that's another theme that's kind of in the game, that there are crises happening around the world. There's there's a threat of weapons of mass destruction being developed by some sort of a dictator perhaps somewhere, and then there's the need to do something about that. But as you move into these crises and try to do something, but you are noticing that you are causing a backlash in terms of terror threats. At the same time, you're battling with polarization in the economic realm at home. There's the question of rules-based international order, especially after the kind of unilateral interventions that we saw in places like Iraq in particular was, I think, a very unpopular intervention. There are question marks about Libya, how that was, especially how it has turned out to be after that. So there's that sort of this idea of unilateralism, and how that sort of has been wearing down the world order. Rules-based world order is kind of at the heart of the game.
That's interesting because standing on the sidelines, in some ways Canada is a bit like Finland. Finland's relationship to Russia is in some ways like the Soviet Russia, is a bit like Canada's relation to the US. It's like there's something a little bit uncomfortable about it. You don't want to speak up too loudly, but it's always been odd watching the U.S. in this rules-based world order, because it's always felt like the U.S. doesn't actually want to be part of those rules. They don't take part in the World Court or lots of the global institutions. They don't want to be held by any of that, and so it's like it doesn't always feel like rules. It's the idea of we'll just do what we want because we're the biggest, and how are they going to feel when they're not the biggest?
I mean, I think it's an interesting question. So I mean, certainly when the U.S. was the only hegemon, like in the so-called unipolar moment, like when in the post-Cold War period, the first decade, maybe into the second decade, it became very fashionable. I mean, essentially already during the Cold War, it became somewhat fashionable to attack the hegemon, attack the U.S. hegemony, right, and show its corruption, show how it's supporting dictators here and there who are engaged in sort of terrible, bloody revenge against those who try to challenge them, and so there was that thing, and at the same time, I mean, especially now in today's situation, and we are looking into what's going on in Ukraine, where there's a challenge happening there from Russia, of the rules-based world order. It's a very sort of it's a very daring challenge, right? They are just very upfront about it. We are just going to march into the second biggest country in Europe, and we're just gonna take it by force. We're not, and so I think we are in a new reality now. Like I think in Europe it's quite clear we are looking and expecting and hoping the United States to be the kind of world policeman to continue support Ukraine. Certainly Europe is picking up in its support. It's driving up its military industrial production, and but it's taking some time. But there's this idea that, well, now when it counts, we are kind of also happy to give US that role that we've and you as academics and scholars as well have spent decades criticizing as well. So it's an interesting situation where we are right now politically, I think, and I think that's also something that's present in the game, in this idea that, well, we can't really have a world, or we can't imagine a world without this kind of baseline democratic tone being set by United States led alliance. We can't. And when we see glimpses of that world, when we look into what's going on in Ukraine, in the Russian conquered areas, this is not something that we can think of it as an option for us, right? This is not an alternative, a political order that we can somehow, right, think of as feasible. Or the same thing if you look into Taiwan and what's going on there, kind of the threatening behavior there, or if you look into North Korea and the nuclear weapons development, process that's going on there. Those are glimpses of an order, or like an unorder, non-order. And I think we are in a very interesting situation historically right now, that we kind of seem to be, like many are also saying, we are entering into a new period of Cold War, and I think that's sort of present in the game as well. That you've got, we can talk a little bit more in detail about the game.
Perhaps. Yeah, well, to bring all these ideas back to the game, does the game take place over a period of years, or how? Like, what's the time structure in the game, and how? I guess my other sort of a question that relates to that is, does it take into account events like 9/11 or the invasion of Iraq, or like do actual historical events happen, or is 2000 just sort of like a starting point and it's a sandbox that could go in different directions?
Yeah, so I had a sandbox idea when I set out to design the game. So I mean, you could say that a game like Twilight Struggle is a sandbox as well, because after all, the order in which the cards and the events occur is well, they are period decks, right? But it's there's a lot of flexibility there. So, and I set out to do a kind of similar thing, that there needs to be this kind of sandboxy element there. That, so I mean, one thing that is driving the game is these kind of so-called world event cards. These are dealt out during the setup, and then there's a mid game phase where some more interplay, and these are world events represent sort of world events from the period. So there's a world event called Saddam Hussein, so obviously referring back to Saddam Hussein and how he once seemed like somebody who was up to no good, developing perhaps weapons of mass destruction, was threatening neighboring countries and the rest of it. There's a world event, Libyan Civil War, which is from a different period than some years later. Libyan Civil War is again something a little bit different, having to do with the Arab Spring. I suppose most people would sort of locate it to the Arab Spring and the Arab Awakening, history. So there's that. There are some world events like Venezuela crisis. It was in the news a couple of years ago how there was perhaps a revolution of some kind happening. It seems to have sort of died down. Fidel Castro died at some point. There was a question for a moment whether there was going to be what's going to happen there. That's an event in the game. So, but the way the order in which those events come out is entirely sandboxy, right? It's free. They may come at the same time. The Libyan Civil War may come out at the same time with Saddam Hussein and Taliban, right. maybe there, but none of the 9/11 may have never occurred, for instance. It's in the game in terms of a world event. Well, so it was important to me to sort of give that freedom and put just a lot of these different elements, different world events into the game without sort of railroading the developments.
Right. It still feels like you're still getting the events, but the timeline is different because they come out at different times. Because I'm thinking about another game by GMT, Mr. President, that just came out a couple years ago or a year ago, and there, even though it's set in a specific time, it doesn't have the same people. You're a generic president. You're not Trump. You're not Bill Clinton. You're not whoever. And so it's in a very specific time, but without all the same people and same events. Whereas games like Twilight Struggle and Order and Opportunity, it's only the timeline that gets scrambled, but you're still getting the actual history.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think of this way that, so what is simulation? Like if we think, if we can, like some people are contesting this idea that games could ever really simulate anything because reality is just so much more complex and games can't possibly simulate. So I think that's a semantic question to some extent. But so if we think about games as sort of, if not simulating, the representing history, then the question is, so what are we representing? How are we representing? How do games manage to do that? And I'm of the school of thought in this regard that I believe that the best representation of history is if you and I think it's Volko who's been talking about this. Actually, I'm influenced by Volko in a lot of my thinking about this thing. So Volko's been talking about this, that what games simulate or represent is incentive structures, right? You have historical actors in certain positions or in certain situations in history, and they have certain incentives to, I don't know, to address a world event, to intervene militarily there, and you have to get the incentive structures in place to represent what that world event exactly is, whether it's Saddam Hussein, and whether Saddam Hussein occurs before or after the Syrian civil war. That's not an essential question in terms of the simulation value. It's more about, do I have an incentive to intervene in a world event in a certain way, right? So that's my way of thinking about historical games, that we are trying to really simulate incentives, trying to go in, get into the shoes of the historical actors, and what comes at them in terms of particular events is kind of secondary in some ways.
That's an interesting way to think about it. And it just made me think of a big part of my life away from gaming is I've been a professional stage actor for like 30 some years now, and so I spend lots of time doing that. And the key to good acting, and it's got to be in the writing as well, of a good play, is each character needs to have something that they need. They have to have some kind of objective, something that they want, that they're trying to do, and that just seems like another way of saying incentives. It's the way things move forward is there needs to be an incentive to move forward to get what you need.
Yeah, that's interesting. And now that you mentioned play, so I like so when we think about modern game design, I think one of the hot topics for some years now has been this question of like narratives. Like, do games tell narratives, right? And then you as an acting man, you will know that if you ask the question about narratives in drama, in theater, in literature, then some of the classic names here is like Aristotle's the dramatic arc, right?
Yeah.
And so those people who work with that, they think of narrative always as whether it's the Freytag pyramid. This is the German playwright who's got essentially the Aristotelian narrative arc, and he conceives it as a pyramid. So they think of narrativity always as having those three steps of the Aristotelian dramatic arc, right? And I think that's something that we should not forget about games either, right? Games are also, I think, they tell narratives, they tell stories, but the way they tell stories, I think, goes back to Aristotle, to the idea that there's a build-up, there's a situation where you are faced with certain, if you like, incentives. There's a certain situation where, I don't know, your lover has run away, right? This is the start, the Aristotelian, is it the I forget what the technical term is, where that situation is described, and then
The
comes
rise in action.
the rise in action, yeah, and then comes the climax, which is sort of like, okay, I found my lover, but she's with somebody else, right? And then this is the sort of the height of the story, and then it goes into the final part of the story where where it's sort of resolved. And I think in games you have the same thing, but it's occurring again and again, and in different ways. So it's like, I don't know, in Fire in the Lake, it's like I'm building up my forces. I set my sights on marching them into Saigon, and then there comes the pivotal moment where I perhaps play the pivotal event, where the NBA pivotal event that allows them to make this big march. And then it comes after that, after the big march, it comes to the end of the story where it's then seen, is the US able to beat them back out of Saigon again? So it's like this Aristotelian dramatic arc in that game, and there are countless small dramatic arcs like this in games. That's the way I think about it. And to make a game that is kind of narratively rich, I think, is to build the possibility of those different arcs into the game design. And it's essentially about giving people incentives to step at the foot of that pyramid and then go through the arc. So I think there's a certainly a way of thinking about games along those
well, you certainly
concepts.
hear that from players a lot. When you hear players talking about games or responding to games, and they're talking about the games they like, quite often, and I'm talking about war games here, like hex and counter games, whatever. You hear them talk a lot about, it told a great story. It really pulled me in, or there was a great narrative. You hear this word narrative all the time as it relates to games, and I think most players seem to really respond to that. There's definitely a subsegment that are fixated with some kind of verisimilitude or historical fidelity that has to be just so. But I think the vast majority of players are really looking for the game to tell them a story or make them a part of the story.
Yeah, and I think it's a really an Aristotelian story, actually, if you think about it, because it's often about, like, as you say, when you listen to gamers describe their gaming experience, or how I think back to the games I played. It's like, do you remember that time when I had that plan? I had a plan. I was getting everything ready for that thing, and then just as I was about to move, then that happened, right? And then so it's all about this building up of the dramatic arc and building it up and seeing it resolve and go into some. It's very Aristotelian. I have to say.
Absolutely, I also think we're hardwired for it. That's stories is a way that we process information and keep the memories make sense. Then it's easier to remember a story than a fact in many ways.
Yeah. So that's the kind of, how we got onto this tangent was the question. Yeah. So order and opportunity. How does it simulate, if you like?
Right.
Then, it's sort of, for me, it's about trying to put in some ways trying to put the player in a position with certain incentives, like trying to resolve a world event, for instance, and then build up that situation in a certain way, put certain difficulties along that path, along that dramatic arc, and then allow them to resolve the situation in certain ways, and sort of try to simulate that way, rather than giving people a lot of cards that have flavor text and say, this is Saddam Hussein. No, that's not the way I like to approach narrative.
Well, getting back to the game, then let's get to a few of the nuts and bolts. How many players does this play this game?
Yeah, so it's for 4. It's up to 4. Let's say it's for up to 4 players. But we were talking earlier about how I am a solitaire gamer. So there's going to be a solitaire system, and there's already one now. I've actively used it in the during development. I find that actually quite a useful tool when you're developing, to have an opponent when you don't have one. So there's a solitaire system. So it's for 1. It's for 2. We've got a really solid 2-player system, because that derives from the idea that, well, the post-Cold War period really is a dramatic arc, if you like, again, developing from this kind of unipolar situation towards a situation where we've got the democratic bloc and an authoritarian bloc.
Right.
So Russia and China, those are the two player sides against EU, Europeans, and the US. So it works rather well as a two-player game when you give the control of the democratic bloc to one player and the authoritarians. So it works as a two-player game, and it works as a three-player game as well. And there the logic is you're going to have two different players take on the United States and the EU, because there are certain differences of interest between the US and the Europeans, especially having to do with things like what do we do about NATO? Who is paying more into? I mean, that was the Trumpian theme. Yeah. So who's like, is the US paying the bills and then the Europeans sort of riding along? So there's that tension. And then the third player would be just controlling both Russia and China. So there's a three player. But yeah, to answer your question, so it's for 1, 2, 3, and 4 players.
Is it possible to do the three player the other way, where one player does the democratic nations and then China and Russia are separate?
It's certainly mechanically possible, but it makes for a better story when the US and the EU players are different players, because so again, if we think about the post-Cold War history, or even history before that, I mean, the Western Alliance is a big concept, right? It's a very important thing that brings North America and Europe and allies, Australia, Japan, and so on together, right? And at the same time, there are also tensions within those alliances, like who is somebody who is sort of reaping the most reward here. Also, what has been present especially in the American sort of international relations writing on the Europe-US relationship is this idea, this fear that, well, if Europe is uniting economically, especially within the European Union, then the question is Europe going to become an economic power that is very larger than the United States? Is there? So there's sort of there are those tensions, right? I mean, certainly you could say there are tensions between Russia and China as well. I mean, we are seeing maybe some of these things play out today, but yeah, from the three-player perspective, it seems more tasty to have the US and the EU kind of be separate players, and then you've got the authoritarian bloc, who are the kind of the challengers.
You said it starts in 2000. Does it have a specific end year?
Not really. So it's been kind of interesting. I've been working on this game since at least 2016. Which is kind of the year where in Europe Brexit happens, or the negotiations start, and Trump comes to power. So and I almost feel like extending the end year of the game, because the game really deals in part with things that are happening as we speak, right?
Sure.
Ukraine is happening, Taiwan, well, it doesn't seem like there isn't anything happening at this moment, but you could imagine it.
Or South, it feels like there's tension there.
Yeah, or South China's Flashpoint, South China Sea. Okay. There's a game on that.
The whole thing that's happening in Gaza, of how that's shaping people's opinions about the U.S. right now.
Yeah,
so there's a giant bit of tension there as well.
Yeah, so at this moment, I kind of think that the game sort of ends somewhere between 2016 and now. I mean, the game certainly has elements and dynamics that flirt with things that are happening right now. So you could even say that the game goes from 2000 to 2024 or something like that. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe the solution that Volko came up for Labyrinth, War and Terror, in terms of titling the game, is the best. Like, just put a question mark, like War on Terror from year 2001 to 20 question mark.
You open up the possibility of having expansions that for what happens, in the years after the game is released.
Yeah. So it's kind of open-ended in some ways. Yeah, it starts with the sort of it's really focused on the idea that in the post Cold War period, there's been this challenge to the U.S. led hegemony, right? There's been this challenge posed on one hand by internal developments. I mean, we've talked about polarization within our own societies, losers and winners of economic globalization. So that's one challenge that is posed from within our own societies, and then there's certainly external challenges from China and Russia to the US. So that's where the game's really focused, and where that process starts. Well, you could say 2000 is a certain starting point, and then but where it ends, we haven't really seen that end yet. So in that sense, the game is kind of open ended at the moment.
You've talked about events on cards. Is it a card driven game?
Well, yeah. So card-driven game. What is that? So
well, I mean, there's a lot of different. There's a lot of different ways a card-driven game can go, right? It's like
yeah. So I mean, my thinking on this is that I mean, you can define the term how you like, I suppose, but CDG. I mean, this is a term that really is introduced with Mark Herman's card-driven games. Especially the idea seems to be called to it that there's the operations point value in one corner of the card, and then there's the event text, right? This is the CDG sort of format. I mean, you could say that any game that is card driven, poker is a CDG. If you go by the board,
but I think the Mark Herman thing, but even that split, like Paths of Glory takes the CDG in one direction, where it adds so many more things to each card, like the replacement points and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But there's other CDGs that still have the operations points or the action points, but they don't.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of like it goes off to some different forks. But I take your point that when we think of CDGs, we're basically thinking of some kind of either events or operations or action points.
Yeah. So, and in that sense, I would say my game is not a CDG because I mean, we can maybe look at some of how the cards look like. But so, I mean, if you take a card for my game, it looks very familiar. So you will have instead of the operations points, you will have a suit. So a card has a suit, and then it has an event option, or it actually has multiple event options.
Yeah, have your playtest module up here, or I can actually, I can put yours up. That's even better, and you can show show some cards here.
Yeah, let me. So I trust you are seeing what I'm seeing, and I'm zooming in here on the on one card. So here's one card from the Chinese deck. So the game is has got 4 players, right? Four powers, as the game calls them: China, Russia, EU, and the US. And each one's got their own small deck of cards. So everyone's got about 20 cards in their deck that they are cycling through. And so here's a card from the Chinese deck, People's Liberation Army. And there on the top left, you can see the suit of the card. So and the function here of the suit is it corresponds to a menu of actions. So each of the 4 suits in the game correspond to a menu of actions that you can take by playing that card for its suit, right? So this is one basic mechanic. And then further down on the card, you've got the event option. In this case, there's just one event option in this card. So the structure is very, very familiar, but instead of operations points, it's got a suit. There's a particular reason why suit and not ops points. We can talk about that later. But so you certainly play cards in the game. You've got a hand of cards. You make use of the suits and the event options to advance your course in the game.
And it looks like very broad regions, like we're used to seeing in a game like, say, Twilight Struggle. So are you trying to place influence? Is it are we looking at that sort of a situation?
Yeah, so this is if you think about it in the cut and dry mechanical terms, yeah, this is an area influence game. So the map is divided into five theaters. So we've got Europe. I mean, the usual suspects: Europe, Asia. We've got the Middle East. We've got Africa, and we've got the what the game calls Americas. So South and North America. And then within each region, and if I zoom in a little bit, we've got then a number of spaces. So for instance, the European Union is a space on its own. So being sort of experimenting with different ways of representing the spaces. This is just a playtest version that you are looking at here right now. But each space is going to have an influence track. So so the influence can go from 1, 2, 3 up to 4, right? And so here are these pieces that people will be then playing and moving here on the influence track on the map to increase their influence. You will notice that the influence comes in 3 flavors. So if we think, and this is in contrast to games like Twilight Struggle, which only has the one type of influence, right? You just increase your influence or you lose some and so on. But this game has got 3 different types of influence. So we've got political influence, which are the octagon. So here's a red octagon for Russian political influence. Here's the US one, and then we've got the triangular, which is economic influence, and then finally here's a cube, which is military influence. This is NATO military influence, happens to be this one. So this one has got 3 different types of influence. Why is that? Well, really, it seemed to me that if we think about the post-Cold War period, then there's a need and there's a chance to simulate and include more than one type of influence in the game. So if we think about something like the European Union is a the great power is a technical term we shouldn't really be using, but it's a significant global power, right? But its power is not really military. I mean, we are seeing this today very much. European military power is actually very small. But what the Europeans have, especially the European Union as a big one big market, what Europe has plenty is economic influence, right? And maybe to some lesser but still significant extent, Europe has political influence. So, and in comparison to the United States has basically everything. They've got economic, they've got political, and they certainly got military influence. China, again, a lot of economic power, economic influence, less political, and at this moment, even though their military force may be very mighty, but they haven't really sort of been exercising that sort of influence, it seems. So it sort of felt like it was necessary here to include different types of influence into the mix and allow therefore also different pathways to victory. You could focus on the economic, you could focus on the military, and then you'd be playing the game slightly differently depending on what your chosen strategy and pathway to victory is.
I mean, I think you're going to get a lot of fans for this idea alone. This having the different kinds of influence, but the way the extra thing you just said there about there's different paths to victory depending on which influence you want to focus on. That makes me think of some of those computer games we mentioned earlier about like games like Civ and stuff like that, where there's definitely different in some of those 4X type games. There's definitely different paths to victory. Sometimes even cultural or religious paths. So that's great to see this in a board game. To see you might want to flex your economic might more than your military might, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think so. So once there was this idea that there'd be different types of influence here, then the thing about going back to the CDG question was that, so if you have a CDG, the classic CDG, then you have the ops points and then you have the event option, right? But when I realized that that I could sort of align the card play more with different pathways to victory, different types of economic influence. I could do that if I introduced suits to the cards, and if I gave suits to the cards that aligned with the types of influence. So, for instance, if I are you seeing the EU hand window here that I'm showing on my?
Yep.
Yeah, so you can see the blue card. So here you can see some of the cards in the EU sort of hand here. So we've got the military suit, which is the shield icon here.
Right.
We've got even cultural suit, which is kind of, it doesn't really align with any sort of influence type as such, but it allows the players to do a couple, some other things. But then if we go a bit further down here, we've got the political suit here, so which is the diplomat in a black suit here in the icon, and then we've got the economic suit. So there's this idea here in the game that so you have a deck of cards, and the makeup, in terms of the suits in your hand and in your deck is kind of showing your strength in different areas. Like, so the EU will have a fairly heavy economic hand, for instance. EU also has a fairly cultural suit heavy hand, right? So, and this is kind of helps give identity to the EU in the game.
I think the cultural cards that are cultural, you can't win with that, but culture is a great way to affect your neighbors. The spread of culture is a great way to spread your ideas, right?
Yeah. So in this game, how this works, what the culture suit has to do with is these markers. So what we have here in the game is, if I bring one here onto the board, so we've got tension, and then its opposite is civil society. So what these represent is especially civil society. So it's like civil society activism. How healthy is your legal system? How healthy is your political system? How much is civil society able and free to participate into the processes that go on in these regions? And so the higher the level of civil society in a space, the further along it is on its way to becoming a democratic, in this case, a region. So the game has a representation a little bit similar to how you've got the governance type in Labyrinth, the War and Terror. The game has a representation of the dominant governance type within a given region. So, for instance, here is the marker for democratic governance type, governance level. And so if that marker was here in Eastern Europe, then democracy would be sort of dominant there. Or then the marker can flip to authoritarian, which is the lock symbol here. So Parliament for Democracy, lock for authoritarian. And so increasing civil society is a way of moving spaces towards the democratic governance, and then increasing tensions are a way of sort of undermining political system, bringing them under pressure, giving a chance for polarizing figures, for instance, to gain a political voice. So tension works to increase authoritarian governance and civil society democracy. And so this is part of what the game calls War of Ideas. So here we've got the War of Ideas track, and this is actually something that the powers in the game pursue kind of semi-cooperatively. So here's one marker here right in the center part of the track, and this moves towards the authoritarian end. So this is the lock, or then towards the democratic end, depending on how many spaces the players have been able to shift towards authoritarian or then towards democracy here on the map. So this measures the balance of democracy versus authoritarianism. And here the yellow icon is a victory point icon. So if the balance shifts, for instance, too far or that far towards the democratic end, then both democratic powers start earning victory points, maybe even up to 2 victory points, and then the same will happen here on the towards the other end. So this is how the game sort of deals with tensions with civil society, and then so the the ongoing war of ideas by bringing this kind of in a way a semi-cooperative aspect into the game.
That's I was just struck by this is the good guys and bad guys. I mean, we live in the West. We're the good guys, but somebody's gonna have to be trying to be the authoritarian. It reminds me in a very odd way of a very big game from last year, the Votes for Women, where one of you has to play the part of the patriarchy, trying to keep the franchise from expanding, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think what's been happening in Ukraine now over the past 2 years, and sort of this general sense that we are entering into another sort of ideological war. We are entering into a war between democracy and authoritarianism, just like maybe in the Cold War we were in a war between democracy and communism, or before that we were during the Second World War. It was a war between democracy and fascism, right? So I think that's an element that we are seeing becoming more and more prominent about this post-Cold War period. So it has to have a representation in the game, and some powers stand for this and others stand for that in that war of ideas.
It's no problem to do that. I mean, we play. Somebody plays the West and somebody plays the Nazis when we play World War II games. It's like it's if you're going to look at history, you've got to look at it from all sides.
Yeah, and I think it's important also to, and this goes back to the sandbox discussion earlier. It's important to notice about this game is that you don't have to be a bad guy. so I think one of the things that, if we again think about the post Cold War period in the longer perspective, and especially in the early years, even after year 2000, there's still this chance and this impression around that, well, this can be a period that is a win-win for everyone. So China is becoming, joining the WTO, becoming an integral part of sort of essentially a Western-led, or at least Western created economic order, right? They are very much becoming part of this, and there's a genuine sense that everyone's benefiting from this. Western consumers are getting goods made at prices that we could only dream of earlier, perhaps, and everyone's kind of winning. Everyone's winning in this situation. So I think it was important for me to also preserve some sort of sense of that possibility in the game, that it doesn't have to come to a confrontation. I mean, it's certainly very easy to come to that sort of ideological confrontation, a confrontation between powers, but still there's a sense in which you could sort of perfectly play through a game and kind of just compete a little bit in the economic dimension, or perhaps a little bit in the political dimension, but never really necessarily touch the authoritarian democratic question all that much. So I think that's important.
How far along is the process? You're on P500, so you must be I'm just guessing you must be doing a lot of playtesting now and sort of trying to nail things down.
Yeah, so we are doing this or I'm doing this, and most of us are doing this on hobby basis. So the playtesting isn't as intensive as you'd hope, obviously, but we've got most of the time some sort of game going on, whether it's me on my own or collectively. And so the basic systems have been stable for I don't know, probably a year or longer. We are sort of in the classic situation with these games, that when is it good enough? When do you stop tweaking, right? And at this moment, the game has got about 570 or so pre-orders, which is good, but it could be a little bit more. I think it's going to have to have a little bit more momentum, a little bit more pre-orders before GMT is sort of starting to allocate things like an art slot, or
Right.
maybe they're going to have some of their development team look into this. So we are kind of waiting for that, and hoping for a couple of more pre-orders. And in the meanwhile, I continue to play, and there's always a little bit of tweaking here and there, but the major changes have, I think, have been made, and the basic system is pretty stable now.
I think games are like novels or plays where the designer or the writer, you don't finish, you just quit, and at some point it has to be published. But it's the I don't most writers I've ever talked to, they never really feel like this is done. It's just I've it's done to where the deadline is, or the play has got to be produced, or the book has got to be published, and so this is what it is.
Yeah. So I mean, that's what Volko is on record saying, that games are never finished; they are just published, and I think there's something very true about that.
So it's the same that same line comes in my line of work too. I think it comes in all creative endeavors.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk to us about this game, or tell us about it, or?
Yeah, I think we've sort of covered the main aspects of it. Maybe playtime. So we've been sort of or like it was my design aim to create a game that has got a global scope, but is playable in a reasonable time. So at this moment, I think we're looking at a play time of about, say, 3 or 4 hours for the full game, which I think in the historical games realm is fairly respectable. It's not a 6 to 8 hour game, but it's rather half of that. So,
right, you can play it
that's very good.
If you can, so you can play it in an evening. You don't need a whole Saturday or something for it.
Indeed, and we've got a short scenario here as well, which should be about half of the full scenario play time. So trying to really make it sort of playable in a shortish evening, if you like. That's something I would talk about. There's quite a lot of, I mean, if people are interested in details, there's quite a lot of text that I produced on this. So the Inside GMT blog from the GMT games themselves has got, I think 4 or 5 articles talking about various details.
I'll link to those in with the video and in my newsletter as well, so that people can see those.
Yeah, and Player's Aid, the blog, the guys Grant and Alex, they've been publishing card spoilers from the game, so you can read a little bit about how the game the cards work, how and of course the historical background to some of the cards in the game. I've just started a series of design diaries where I talk about more history and more background to to the game and what it's trying to represent and achieve. So those are the sources. And I also have a habit of trying to occasionally shoot a set of YouTube videos that I essentially play through, where I'm just going through the game turn by turn, trying to show people, what are the mechanics, what are the dynamics, how does the game sort of work, and how does it feel like to play, and so on. So that's
I read
chance.
The first chapter of your design diary. It's just the first episode is out so far, but I'll link to that too. That's at the Player's Aid as well, and I really recommend anybody who's interested to check it out. It's on top of giving information about what you're doing, it's just a thoughtful and well written piece. I think you've done a lovely job there.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a personal take, so it's sort of talking about a little bit about this background to the game, like the post Cold War period. It's been in some ways the period where I've sort of grown up and become an adult, and seen many of the events that occur in the game, and then sort of this political polarization that we see in our societies now. And in some ways, the game is kind of an attempt to understand where is that polarization coming from? How does it have to do with sort of global power competition and that sort of thing? So in that article you can read all about that background.
Well, great. It's been fantastic talking to you, Vez, and getting to know you. I'm really looking forward to this. There will be, well, it's already on P500, I guess. So anyone can sign up for it if they haven't already. But thanks for being my guest on Pushing Cardboard, and I look forward to seeing how this all turns out.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate the chance to be here today and talk with you about this game, and we've covered a lot of interesting things. I think that's a great thing about our hobby as well, that we are just not playing games, but we are thinking about many different things, historical phenomena, and trying to understand our own times as well. So it's been really interesting. Thanks a lot for the invitation.
See you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks, Vez. It was great talking to you. And everybody, if you haven't yet, please check out Vez's game on the GMT website. It's on the P500 now, I think. So get in there, check it out, and sign up for the P500. Okay, parting shots. Let's take a moment this month to appreciate Dean Essig of the Gamers, one of the most prolific and well-loved designers in the hobby. Dean has been dealing with cancer and has finally been moved to hospice. Dean has 92 designs to his name, a phenomenal output. He also founded the Gamers, a highly influential game company that eventually merged or found a home with Multiman Publishing. Dean is the creator of the Operational Combat series, the Standard Combat series, and the Battalion Combat series, among many other standalones and series. But those 3 series alone are enough for many gamers to be happy for a lifetime of gaming. Dean won a bunch of Charlies and, of course, is a member of the Charles Roberts Awards Hall of Fame. Well, we all hope that Dean will recover and make it home from hospice. It's unlikely he'll go back to running the Gamers. So for now, that duty's been given to his longtime associate, Carl Fung, who also heads up the BCS series. Our thoughts are with Dean and his family. Let's all pour one out for Dean tonight and salute all that he's given us. That's it for another episode of Pushing Cardboard. You'll hear from me again in a month. In the meantime, drop by the website or the Discord server. There's always some sort of chatter going on or a poll to participate in. And please, while you're there, fill out the survey on this episode. I appreciate the feedback. In the meantime, that's all, friends. Talk to you soon.